Rings of Power, Village Rails, and Unmatched Digital Edition. This is Staying In.
We've had a question come in from a listener. Again, can you believe it?
Did you hear it?
Did you hear it streak past?
On the wind.
Yes, we just grabbed it out the air.
There was a voice on the wind, and it asked, what did it ask us, Chris, that voice on the wind?
Unfortunately, it didn't ask us anything for Peter Investigates, but Pete's no doubt deep undercover with under a different name, in some kind of governmental organisation somewhere. Ben Tucker asks us if there are any good one-handed apps or games out there. I believe they're about to become a parent soon.
Okay, that was a crucial piece of information that I needed there.
Yeah, because the question is, why do you need a one-handed game?
Yeah.
Just get your heads out of the gutter and just let's help Ben with one-handed games or apps, as it were.
Okay.
I'm going to throw this over to start off with to Sam and Dan.
Okay. All right. Okay. As parents.
Yeah, I wasn't just singling Pete out.
All right. Okay. Okay. Well, first of all, congratulations, Ben.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Thank you for sending us in a question. I can't. There's nothing from.
There's one that jumps out to me.
Okay.
The one that jumps out to me is one of your favourite games, Sam, because I'm putting my head in the picture of, like, those late nights. You got one arm is, let's say, being utilised, so you've got this free arm, and I'm thinking not words.
Yeah, well, what I was going to say was that from my own experience, I didn't actually do much one-hand gaming. Instead, I used that valuable time, and this is worth thinking about, Ben. This is a perfect time to either A, start playing some ace games one-handed on your phone, or crack through some of those TV series or films that you've long been willing to watch. During the nursing period of my son, I got through all of Better Call Saul and the first 3 seasons of The West Wing. My wife did all of Desperate Housewives and most of Friends again. So it's a good period. It's a good amount of time to really be very, very productive. So Dan, I agree with you, not words, and I tried it out today. I did it one-handed, just to test that it would work, but not things like that, like not words or Sagrada.
So that's not words spelt with a silent K at the start. So that's KNOTWORDS. It's a very good kind of Scrabbly, kind of puzzly game, kind of cross between Scrabble and Sudoku.
Yeah, and those are the games that kind of came to my mind first off. Things like Cartographers and Railroad Inc. I think actually what I would recommend are things like either the Bart Bonte games, so all of that series from Bart Bonte, so Yellow especially, really good. And another game I would recommend is Really Bad Chess, which is a chess variant where you start off with different pieces every single time, and sometimes those pieces don't behave like you expect them to. So it's a really interesting puzzle and kind of gives you a lot of headspace to think while you're doing it. And I think my final one would be something like Solitairica, which I don't know if you guys have heard about, which is solitaire, but it's an RPG. So you take on a typical RPG character, like a warrior, a wizard, a thief, and then you play through a whole RPG campaign, but by playing solitaire. So it gives you that like quick sort of puzzly hit, but there's a bit of more of a longevity to it. There's a narrative and there's a story, which I think when you're in this situation doing protracted periods of nursing, I think that would probably be my top tip.
I think also you've got kind of any kind of endless runners, like if that's your bash, then I'd go maybe something like that. There's kind of quite a lot of endless runners that may be good. Something like Adventure Capitalist.
That's a good shout.
I mean, you can get sucked into it. Like, I've played it and I've had to stop myself because I've got too sucked into it, and it kind of monopolises a lot of time.
Just wake the baby up so you can carry on.
Exactly, yeah. So that could work as well. I was thinking of a game that I played. I'm not even sure if it's still available now. It's called 1800. Do you remember that game? It was just it was basically there would be like it was kind of all red and white, and there'd be a pattern on the screen, and you had to stop the pattern at a specific point.
Yes.
And it was the specific point was scored at 1800, and so if you were missed it, you might miss it by one, and it'd be 1799 or something like that. I got insanely into that game to the point that I was like in the top 10 in the world at that game. But I don't know if it's still kind of available. But like it was, like that was a really good. And obviously that's just one touch, so that's just all you need for that. But I think there are plenty of games, because like any traditional mobile games, kind of the old school mobile games, before they kind of introduced any kind of like virtual joysticks or anything like that, they were made for one hand, because people just assumed you wouldn't be playing mobile games with two hands, because it's not a gaming platform.
And also the screens were a lot smaller as well. Like now, like I've not got the biggest of phones, but it's still like 6.5 inches, which my thumb cannot get.
Size doesn't matter, Sam.
All right, we need to move on from this. So I've got some game recommendations as well.
Here he comes.
Oh, hang on a minute. Hang on a minute. So it's not that we need to move on from this. It's we need to move on to Pete's time to talk.
No, we need to move on. No, we need to move away from where this conversation is absolutely going. We're talking
and we need
about...
to go to former Pocket Gamer editor.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Listen. Right, 3 really, really good games that are a little bit off the beaten path. One of them is a game called OK Golf, which is a very good, chilled, one-handed golf game. Very simple, straightforward, beautiful looking thing, and very relaxed. You can take it at your own pace, but there's lots and lots and lots to do in there, lots to see and lots to explore. One we've talked about in the podcast before, Skiing Yeti Mountain, which is an excellent game. It's a one-handed skiing game, which is absolutely brilliant. It's basically just a slalom game. There's hundreds and hundreds of bits of the mountain to go down, and getting all the way is brilliant. It's got a really good sense of humour, really beautiful, precise controls, really, really good. And then finally, one from built around Bristol way is a game called Occo. So that is OCO, Occo. And it can be a rhythm game. It's not a rhythm game. It's a puzzle game that's also a platformer, very straightforward, very in terms of its visuals, but very clean, very laser cut, kind of pixel visuals. And essentially, the idea is that you are platforming with a forever moving object. But you need to go and see it to believe it. It's a really lovely game, Occo, very, 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 very good. Very good for things like high score chasing and trying to figure out how on earth am I meant to do this in 6 jumps. I used 9, and I thought that was the number of jumps that would be the minimum. But apparently you can do this level in 6. How on earth? Really, really good, and well supported by the developer as well. Those would be my big 3.
Okay, Chris's big 3. If we're going to stick with that as a title, Ganchon Clever. I think that's a really good one on the phone. I would probably say something like Monument Valley or Monument Valley 2. I love those games. Very relaxing, very cerebral. It is literally just pressing 1 point on the level and letting your character just move towards where you want them to go, and that's quite satisfying. And probably something like Alto, where you're literally just tapping the screen for each jump as you're kind of a bit like an endless runner, like you were talking about, Dan. Alto or Odyssey, but rather than kind of like over their shoulder going away from you, it's side scrolling. And again, like Monument Valley, just some really, really beautiful visuals there that are quite relaxing. And I'm thinking of, in the late hours, it might be quite a nice thing to have, rather than just something that is just like this, like in your face, frenetic kind of experience.
If you want something bigger than a phone experience, Ben, then I would just suggest getting a Switch, because one thing that I did quite a lot was, because you can take off the Joy-Cons, you don't have to have the Joy-Cons holding it in a specific place. You can like cross your hands and still control a game. So you can literally hold a child with 2 hands, holding the Joy-Cons underneath your like chest with crossed arms, and still play like a full-fledged game. So I think
one image.
What? So what was I playing when I was like nursing Hugo? I think it was something like Mario Odyssey. So I'd just be like playing Mario Odyssey with both Joy-Cons sort of crossed over in my hands, or playing like FIFA or whatever whilst I was nursing him, which is kind of like one of the things you only get with the Switch. So that would be another, bit more of an outlay than buying a couple of mobile games.
I
But
mean,
you're going to be there a while, so invest in the future.
amazing. Sam, we went to a board game convention the other day,
We did.
twice in 1 year.
We stood in a queue
Yep.
to go to an event that had lots of military paraphernalia and flags.
Excellent.
And was a little too long for what it actually ended up being, but
Is this searing political commentary, or are we on to? So which one was it? Was tabletop? Was it Manchester?
Yes. It was, I think, the first time they've held it in Manchester. I think usually it's a stalwart of London. That's where usually its stomping ground is. So I think Sam was the one who kind of directed my attention to this, and we just thought how brilliant to have this on our doorstep, both of us living in the Northwest, and to kind of go and support that, really, with a view that, more and more stuff of this might occur in the future, really. Yeah, I did have a kind of a weird encounter, though, because I had arranged to kind of cook a lovely aubergine parmigiana in that evening, and my shopping arrived the day before, and the only thing that didn't have was aubergines, which is kind of a crucial. I can't really work around it.
Yeah, you can't really fudge that, can you?
No, they did give me 2 red onions as an alternative, which I don't think would have worked. But anyway, so Sam very kindly drove us into Manchester very, very early in the morning so we could get there for when it opens.
Yes.
I want to be there when it opens, Chris. Okay, Sam?
beat the queue.
Yeah. So as we leave the car park, he's like, oh, there's a shop here. Do you want to go and get yourself like a bottle of water and stuff? I said, yeah. Walk in. Oh, this is actually quite a big supermarket. While I'm here, and I found them. 3 beautiful, succulent aubergines.
I don't know if I like the phrase succulent aubergine.
Oh no, Pete, you should have seen these things. They're incredible. And I paid for them with my bottle of water, put them in my bag. And as Sam said, you queue for ages. But then I didn't realise, but you get to the security where they check your bags.
I walked straight through. They didn't care about my bag.
No. And
But Chris,
so the security guard, I just go, oh God, opens my bag up. He just looks in. All that's inside is essentially a bottle of water and 3 aubergines.
Yeah.
And he just says to me, he goes, aubergines? What's that about then?
I mean, it's a fair question to
yeah,
ask.
it's a question. Yeah.
And I think I must be the only person in human history who's ever walked into a board game convention with 3 aubergines. And I carried them around with me the whole day. And it was a lovely parmigiana. But yes, it was a really interesting event. Where was it, Sam? It was the O2...
So it's the Victoria Warehouse in Manchester, and this was Tabletop Gaming Live. So it's like the convention of the magazine Tabletop Gaming.
Oh, cool. Okay, yeah.
And if you'd like to know more, there's pictures on our Instagram and Twitter feeds of me and Chris wandering around the show, and it was a pretty good convention. I mean, it didn't top the dizzying heights of Aircon, and it wasn't as comprehensive and as busy as the UK Games Expo, but it was actually a really sort of gentle convention, and it had like all the big names were there. Asmodee were there, Coiled Spring, Ravensburger, lots of names that we've mentioned on this podcast before. So, like with all conventions, Steam Forge Games were there because they're just based in Media City, which isn't far away. And so, like with all conventions, it was just really nice just to get to know people and speak to people and talk about games that they've got coming up. And we got to talk about the podcast and just lots of lovely things. The lady who runs the surprise stare games stand who has now encountered me on 3 separate occasions, and like I remember her every single time, but I don't think she has any recollection. As soon as I leave, I think she just wipes me from her memory, but I just talk to her like we're good friends now. And like I finally bought one of their little war games actually this time, because like whenever I go to a convention I like to buy something, and it tends not to be like something that I can get in a shop or something small that an independent company is giving away or whatever. So one of the first games I bought was for Chris, which is Luxa Turner, but they also make these like 3 small war games that are like meant to recreate that war game experience, but they're in tiny boxes. So I bought one called The March of Progress, which is a 2-player dice allocation war game, and it was just we met some listeners as well. Can you believe that? We met some listeners.
No, really?
Yes. Yeah.
They don't. Yeah. They're not real. They're not real. Surely.
Pete, we were genuinely asked. They said, "Look, I'm going to close my eyes and just talk so I can guess who you are." Because
that's so cool.
Isn't that great? And they were really, really lovely. And and I think Sam's absolutely right. For me, my main takeaway from this was, because Sam's such an awesome kind of network. It was like walking around with the Great Gatsby at one of his parties. Like he just knows a lot of people because he's a very friendly person. Whereas I think
Oh, thank you. I don't think of myself as I am. I'm a friendly person. Like if you speak to me, I'm not a bastard. But like
it's not just a binary.
But like I'm just not very good at that.
So where are you going on your holidays this year?
Yeah, exactly.
I'm the reverse. I can kind of talk about that kind of stuff a little bit more readily, I think, genuinely. But it was really lovely. It was very much a kind of more of a people experience for me. And I know we were only there for a morning, really. It was a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but I really feel we got a lot from that experience there, genuinely. Yeah. We played a few games as well, didn't we?
We did. I must just say thank you, Gavin, and thank you, Sarah Jane, for coming up and saying hello to us and being very nice about us and the podcast. That's very much appreciated. But yeah, we did get to play a few games. We played a couple of games from Hachette, which they have like these very grand puzzle games, and they're very much like, those big books you get that are like coffee table books. And it's like you wouldn't go to bed and read it, but you'd happily sit with a cup of tea and peruse it and enjoy the artistry and the artwork. And Hachette have these puzzles which are the same. There's like Quarto and Corridor, and I'm not mispronouncing those, but they all start with a Q, which I'm never quite sure how to pronounce it. And they're just the most elegant abstract puzzle games that I have played. They're just like, especially Quarto, where you have these abstract shapes, and they're either made out of a light wood or brown wood. They're either cylindrical or square. They're either tall or short, or they have like an indented hole at the top, or they're flat. And the idea of the game is for you to get 4 of one kind in a row. So get 4 tall ones, 4 short ones, 4 light, 4 dark, or 4 flat, or 4 indented. And that would be an interesting puzzle game in and of itself. But what this does, which makes it so elegant, is that you pick the piece that the other person has to play with and has to put down. So it suddenly becomes this lovely, rich, strategic experience where you don't really have to think 2 steps ahead. You don't really have to do much analysis. It's just simply, what piece are you going to give your opponent to play with this turn? And it makes it such an elegant experience. And one of those things where if it was on a coffee table, like I'd happily enjoy it. It looks fantastic. Like these pieces are magnificently carved. But I think the game of the show for me was probably one that wasn't actually at the show. And I brought
But we had someone come up to us and ask us if he bought it at the show.
Yes, it definitely got everyone's attention. Everyone was asking us. And consequently, Chris, I thought about this afterwards. Wasn't it Switch and Signal that people came up to us and asked us about?
You're absolutely right.
Aircon? Yeah. So this is the second convention in a row that someone has approached Chris and I whilst we've been playing a game about trains.
Trains.
You look like the sort, to be fair.
You're wearing your train conductor hat.
Yes, we're yeah, what wasn't discovered in my bag, unlike Chris's aubergines, was my copy of Village Rails from Osprey Games, which I smuggled into the convention because I thought we might get half an hour just to play this out. And yeah, we had an absolute whale of a time playing Village Rails. It's becoming one of my favourite games that I've played this year, and I'm not sure how much longevity it has, but whilst I'm playing it, I've been really, really enjoying it. And a few years ago, Osprey released Village Green, okay? And this was by a designer called Pierre Sylvester. And like on the cover of the box, it says a game of pretty gardens and petty grudges. And it's a tableau builder where basically you're trying to build the prettiest garden and scoring things based on what's adjacent to what. Now, along comes Village Rails, which isn't designed by Pierre Sylvester. It's designed by Matthew Dunstan and Brett J. Gilbert, with some incredible art by Joanna Rosa. And out the gate, sorry, Village Green, but this one's got a better tagline, which is, Chris?
A game about locomotives and local motives.
That's very good.
See?
Yeah.
See what I mean? And like Village Green, this again is a tableau builder, and what I guess I mean by that is what you're doing on the table is collecting cards and filling in spaces that will create like a scene. And in this case, it's a scene of lots of connected railways, and you're building up this complex network of railway lines which stretch across this 3x4 grid. So every player gets this little sort of almost like set square piece to sort of map out the 3x4 grid that they're working towards. And that will sort of also start them off with some of the sets of terrain, so it's like pasture, wheat fields, lakes, and villages. And then you start playing. So every turn you pick up a piece of track and you put it into your tableau, and there are features on these tracks, which are things like barns and farms and signals. And the main core of the game is obviously to get the most points. But you do that by combining bits of track that might share features or complement each other. So, for example, if you've got a farm feature on your track, you'll get a point for every different type of terrain that is in that series of connected tracks. If you've got a signal, you'll get points for the most amount of signals that you've got in that track, and so on and so forth. And you have this wonderful little like red dial where you can all keep track of your scores as you're playing, and it's a really tight puzzle. But I think the thing that impresses me most about Village Rails, I don't know if Chris agrees with me on this one, but the superb thing about it is that to pick up new bits of rails and to pick up new trips which help you score more points costs you some money. So there's this dual economy going on. There's an economy of points, as in trying to get the most points, but there's also economy of money, which is trying to always ensure that you've got a flow of money coming in, because if you want to get the most points, you're going to need money. So what the game is essentially telling you is that you can, if you really want to get the highest scores, you're going to need to always have a good pool of money, because you can't just rely on the last track in the shop to be one that's going to fit perfectly into your tableau. You can't always rely on the cheapest trip to be something that's going to give you the best score. So you've got to always be thinking about getting money in as well as scoring points. And it creates such a wonderful little puzzle and conundrum that never gets too heady, it never gets too complicated, it never really sort of stretches you too far into analysis paralysis, but just keeps you bubbling away enough that makes the game really, really exciting. And in very similar games where you might be like laying down tiles or again building a tableau, where you can easily get sucked into trying lots and lots of things, or like trying lots of ways of scoring points. Village Rails, by using this economic system, is a very clever way of just getting you to focus on very simple things and very uncomplicated pathways. So rather than trying to like create 12 different lines, you're just focusing on one or two, and the rest of them are just bringing in the money.
Yeah, I'm very much looking forward to the HS2 expansion. I think that's going to really change things.
That'll take a few years more.
Do you know what I love about this game? I was thinking about this the other day. I love the art in it. It's some beautiful kind of pastoral scenes there. It reminded me a lot of the kind of colour scheme of, I don't know, something like Odin's Ravens. It's just a joy to kind of handle these cards and to build this beautiful patchwork quilt of these different landscapes. But another thing I really, really like about this game is that you can play this game completely switched off, because you can always play a track card, and the game ends when somebody's got all their tracks down, essentially. So in those moments, if you wanted to just take a break and just enjoy that kind of satisfactory sensation of creating this jigsaw of train tracks and seeing how they satisfyingly kind of intertwine with each other seamlessly and connect, great, you can. And then you can also, if you want to, tune into that really, really interesting dance between points and pounds.
Yes, and it makes it such an elegant game to teach as well. Like, because you can just teach it as you are playing it. Like the first turn, you're not going to you start off with a bit of money. So from the first turn onwards, you can kind of just, because the choice is going to be very minimal, you can just teach it to someone as you play it. Because every step you can go, well, you can pick up this card, or you can decide to take one of these or one of these, and this will benefit you in one of these different ways. There's such an organic feel to the way that the puzzle evolves that it makes it a bit more of an easy teach. You can just teach it as it plays.
Daniel, I want you to take me back to the very first time you encountered, either in book form, radio form, or film form, J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings.
The Lord of the Rings, I kind of picked up from my family. I remember distinctly, like, they were all kind of like my mum's like family. She's got like 4 siblings, and obviously then they all have kids as well. And it was always something that they'd always read and always raved about. And it was kind of it was in my consciousness without actually knowing what it was. And I remember when the films were coming out, and they were all getting really excited about it. I think like my cousin had come around and like showed us like there's a video, the trailer's been revealed of the first one. Again, I didn't know anything really about it, and I remember watching it, and we were watching it on like the computer, and it was like on like a 2-inch by 2-inch size video, because it was like, this is a long time ago.
Quick time.
On probably a dial-up modem type thing where it takes about half an hour to load a 2-minute trailer. I watched that first film and then basically just devoured all the books. So I think I've not read some of the smaller stuff, some of the kind of the more obscure stuff. I've not read the Silmarillion, which I do have, but it's always just felt a little bit kind of...
It's a tough read.
It's always felt a little bit too imposing, I think. And I've always kind of been a bit wary of it. However, saying that, I don't think I've ever been more tempted to be reading the Silmarillion than I am right now, because I have started watching Rings of Power.
So how does so as someone who sort of enjoys Tolkien's work but is very much not that interested in it. No, I don't know where I sit with Tolkien. I think
Sounds like a backhanded compliment to me.
Well, you're not a J.R.R. arsehole, are you? You're
no. I do remember.
How long? Hang on. How long did it take you to come up with that, Pete? How long have you had that one just sitting in your back pocket?
Or a Tolkien white guy.
Yeah. Like I remember as well, Dan, going to see the movies with my parents, and Like that was the first ever sort of I've ever heard of the Lord of the Rings. And I remember we were coming out of the Fellowship of the Ring, and my dad was so stunned by what he'd seen. He drove through a red light that night. And I was like, that was very out of character for my dad. But anyway, obviously I've read all
What did he do after the Two Towers?
launched a siege. So I've read the three books and The Hobbit. I recently reread Fellowship of the Ring, voiced by Andy Serkis, which is an incredible experience, and I recommend it to anyone, even if you've already read the books. And I think The Hobbit is a perfect children's book, but like I think one of the reasons why I've not been interested in Rings of Power is I don't know where it sits in terms of like all this world which I know and that I'm comfortable with.
Okay, so the positioning of it in terms of perhaps time frame and time period, it's not exact. It doesn't specify exactly where it sits within the kind of the timeline. However, based on kind of a basic knowledge of the Lord of the Rings, you can kind of position it to be somewhere in the time leading up to kind of the great battle where the Sauron is defeated. So it's basically I think the idea is this show will cover that whole story. So based on the rise of Sauron up until, I imagine, his defeat.
So are you talking about the big battle where they cut off the ring?
Yes, so this is all set thousands of years before the story of the Lord of the Rings.
Okay.
So strap in.
If you've seen the Lord of the Rings, this is basically all set before what the prologue of the Fellowship of the Ring tells you. So the prologue of the Fellowship of the Ring, this whole series is set before that, and I imagine theoretically it would probably end at the point of where the prologue is as well. So that would give you your full circle of the whole story. I know that because there are certain characters which are important to the Lord of the Rings kind of history who are present within this series. So the main character, the lead protagonist, it's most definitely an ensemble cast, but probably if there is going to be a lead, it's probably Galadriel, who's obviously a character in the Lord of the Rings. It's a very different character that's appearing in Rings of Power, which is interesting because obviously you have this thing of how will this character who we see here, which is kind of a warrior character, become this ethereal presence that she becomes in the kind of the timeline of Lord of the Rings. And obviously it's not a straight prequel. It's not got the people involved as the films. However, there is the visual sense of this series is very similar to the Lord of the Rings films. It's the style of the Lord of the Rings and the imagery and the landscapes, that's very iconic. Swooping shots through the sky, through the mountains, and it very much feels part of this world. This is obviously the most expensive series ever made. Mm-hmm. By gum, you can see that money on the screen. It does look absolutely incredible. It looks better than lots of big budget movies. Like I don't mean to slam on them, but some of the Marvel films of late, is far kind of superior to them. The visual effects are fantastic. You can see the fact that they're using practical effects, which always looks better, especially some of because you do have the different races, whether it's dwarves or especially kind of the orc kind of race. You can see prosthetics and that it's practical effects. It's not just a CGI character. And that always, one of the things about the original Lord of the Rings films was there was that grounding in reality, that these were physical people. You could see them. Yeah. Obviously, I'd say you could see the makeup, but you can see that it's real, it's physical, it's not just been it's not got that sheen of being through a computer. So that's kind of where we sit with it, and that's the kind of the overview of kind of where the show is. I really love how they've captured the language of Tolkien. They've captured that tone. It's almost Shakespearean at times. The way you look at it. Obviously, there's going to be lots of comparisons with the likes of Game of Thrones and stuff. And Game of Thrones does at times lean that way as well. But obviously, this is high fantasy. Game of Thrones is fantasy, but it's mainly dragons, and everything else is relatively normal. This is high fantasy. This is monsters and trolls and dwarves and elves and all that stuff. So for some people, that may kind of put them off because they're not. Like, my wife isn't a big fan of Lord of the Rings and watched the first episode, greatly admired it, but wasn't hooked by it. And I think, like, she's not a big kind of fan of the high fantasy and stuff. What's interesting about it, because I don't want to go into story beats, what I'm finding difficult is I'm finding myself quite detached from it, because there are certain locations that they go to, or certain story beats, or certain characters that are almost like Easter eggs. They go to Numenor, which in the Lord of the Rings is mentioned, has a historical purpose, historical impact. But as soon as they go there, suddenly my brain starts whirring. I'm like, ooh, all this stuff that I've heard of, I'm now seeing, and it kind of takes me out of the story a little bit.
Yeah.
And it's really difficult. It's my love of the material is keeping me at a distance a little bit, and I wonder if perhaps that's why I'm not in love with it like I thought I might be. It is keeping me a little bit at a distance, and I just need something to kind of let that drop, and I can just really fall into it, because I'm not quite there yet.
How is that different from reading the books and then watching the films? Surely are those the two same things, or is it different?
It's interesting. Like, it's because a lot of the books, and it's often used as a criticism of Tolkien's writing, that he seems more interested in places than characters. So he does a very good job at describing landscapes. And as Dan said, in something that is such a high budget, that was filmed on location in New Zealand, front and centre you've got those landscapes. And to kind of put it into perspective, as they cut between these different areas of Middle Earth, the camera will cut across the map. So you're getting those kinds of echoes of the book, but where you're kind of flicking, as I was kind of flicking to the front to see the map of Middle Earth, then flicking back to the text. And actually, this is one of the very few television series where I felt I had to have a map with me, because I was just so interested in seeing, okay, where's this in relation to this? And to kind of get to the point Dan was making, I feel almost that because they've got a lot of series mapped out, I think 5 in total, I think this first series is very much the outer frame of a jigsaw, where you always start at the edges first. And obviously, but those sides aren't meeting yet. So at the moment, we are cutting between various different regions of Middle Earth that aren't necessarily all aware of each other, and they're all having their own separate parallel narratives. And at the moment, to date, they haven't yet properly intertwined or intermingled with each other. So it feels like a tour for a Middle Earth that we never got to see, because in The Lord of the Rings, we see these ruins, these watchtowers, and we actually see them now in their heyday, when this civilization was once here. We see the elves no longer as towards the end of their life and going back to their homeland, but we see them almost here now, as in this post-war landscape, almost as an imposition to some of humanity that are there.
I can hear already what Pete's going to say in criticizing, and like to me, I don't know what you were going to say, Pete, but like I think this is one of the reasons why I've not really wanted to watch Rings of Power, is that we're seeing things before. Like, I'm not saying that this is in Rings of Power, it probably isn't, but like the Watchtower where Frodo is stabbed or whatever, like the Weathertop, like there is such a rich part of that telling where they come across Weathertop and they learn about it. And for me, like, that is part of what makes fantasy so rich to read, like understanding what happened and how it fits in the story that they're telling now. So, like, for me, I don't want that to be kind of taken away from, like, my reading of Lord of the Rings, which kind of feels like what's happening with Rings of Power is they're just, like, stripping away at what made Lord of the Rings so great, which was learning about things, but just in the past tense.
What I would say, and because I'm sure Pete wants to jump in on this as well. What I would say, like as Chris mentioned, it is kind of like a tourist journey through Middle Earth. That's the thing. It's not a tourist journey through the Lord of the Rings. It's a tourist journey of Middle Earth. I don't think we've seen any locations yet which appear in Lord of the Rings.
No, we haven't.
So it's
But
not
that's what Chris
about-
just said.
No. I was
ruins,
talking about
but no.
ruins in general, like the ruins of this old civilization. Who was this civilization? We actually see the kind of, but we don't actually go to specific, as of yet.
Yeah,
We've not
so
gone to
there's
specific
not a
locales
scene-
from any of the books. Like, this is 1,000 years before the landscape of Middle Earth. That's why there's no map that reflects this, because it's just changed so much. Like, from
Okay, I was a bit confused about what you're saying.
The thing that I find about this, and I'm not a huge Lord of the Rings fan, but like, it's good, obviously, but like, surprise. But like, it's not like a huge part of my life. But one of the things I love about sci-fi and fantasy is when they give you room to imagine. When you look at all of the sort of intellectual properties that I'm particularly interested in, so things like 40K, things like even Lord of the Rings to some extent, things like Metal Gear and stuff like, along those lines, for example. All of them are very good at what's called door-ajar narrative, where they go. So let me give you an example from the 40K universe. There's something called the Eye of Terror. And the first time that the Eye of Terror, so this is a location in the galaxy, was mentioned, it's just mentioned as, oh, that's the Eye of Terror. There's no more details about what it is, there's no real specific location as to where it is. There's just, that's called the Eye of Terror. And in your mind, you're sort of putting together this thing of like, what's inside of it? Like, why is it referred to this? What is it that's in? Is there something inside of it that is a terror? What is the, or is it is it some play on words of terror as in earth? Is it like, what is the thing there? And that to me is really, really exciting, right? Like, I'm like, what could that possibly be? When a good example of this going wrong is when George Lucas goes, oh, this mystical force? Midichlorians. Like, as soon as he explains it, it's boring. Like, you're just like, obviously the whole thing was like, what is the force? Is it magic? Is it some sort of untapped, like, energy? Is it scientific? As soon as he explains it as, oh, it's a natural phenomenon and this is how it works, it's boring. And, like, to me, like, if in Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power, if we're exploring all of these, what were the elves like? This is what they were like. That's really boring to me, in the very least.
What I completely agree with you. I completely agree in that kind of that idea, and what you mentioned in kind of with Star Wars and stuff is a very good example of that. What I would say is that this isn't the kind of the creators of Rings of Power coming up with answers to all these questions. Like, what they're taking it from source material. So You've got the Lord of the Rings, and this is coming from the appendices, all written by Tolkien. So this is all Tolkien's work, and there is books of the history of Middle Earth, and that is what is being discussed here. So there might be references, say, in the Lord of the Rings to an old evil called Morgoth. It might be just mentioned in Lord of the Rings. Within some of the wider writings of Tolkien, that's fleshed out and that is discussed and that is all answered and explained. So it's not a case of there was a plot hole or a plot gap, let's fill it in. It's not like that. It's about, let's tell this other story that was also written, which then inflects on the future story. So yes, the Lord of the Rings may refer back to something which we are now dramatizing, but we're not dramatising it just because the Lord of the Rings mentioned it. We're dramatising because it was written in a separate novel, basically.
I'm kind of like going to always look at this through rose-tinted glasses, because I remember watching The Fellowship, and a bit like having a nice fine meal. I really like what I'm eating. I don't know what's in it, and I don't know why. But I was captivated by The Fellowship when I first watched it. It blew me away. It made me want to read all the books. And this is just giving me those same feelings, really, of journeying back to Middle Earth and just immersing myself in it. It feels like a genuine treat, and I look forward to every week, really. I think they've done a very, very good job.
When you make video games, one of the things that you do is you always look at your competitors. And there is a company out there that I have been following for a very long time, and they are called Acram Digital. Mostly because, partly because they have a 2-word company that begins with A and has digital at the end of it, and partly because they do digital tabletop adaptations, and that's something that I used to do a whole lot. And I've always followed their history with interest, and we talked about them a lot on this podcast. So you might remember that these are the folks that did the digital adaptations of 8-Minute Empire,
Oh, yes.
Good.
Istanbul,
Yeah.
Charterstone, which I think was let down mostly by the game itself. And now, and they've also done Steam, Rails to Riches, I don't really know that one, and Concordia, which I hear is very good.
Oh.
Apparently,
Oh, yeah,
all the big
yeah,
games
yeah.
like it.
Excellent.
Excellent stuff. So, then
And the digital version is also
is it good?
Excellent.
Really good for
Yeah.
asynchronous play as well.
Ooh,
Yeah.
okay,
Ooh.
cool. Well, there's a theme because they've just put out Unmatched Digital Edition. Now we talked about Unmatched back on a previous episode, which of course,
Go on, Chris.
Oh, I think that was episode 127 of the pod.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, 127. Excellent stuff. So we talked about the physical.
Every time.
Yeah, every time. We talked about the physical edition back on 127, and I was really, really intrigued by what that was. So when I found out that Acram Digital was making, which is a developer that I really, really love, video game developer that I really, really love, was doing a digital adaptation of Unmatched, which sounded like a great game that I hadn't played yet. I was like, okay, fantastic. I had to go and play it. So we got I went and asked for a review key for this, so I've been playing the early access version. And my goodness me, they've once again absolutely knocked it out the park when it comes to digital adaptations. There's some caveats in here, and mostly because it's an early access game. But basically, I think it's really good, and I think it's a really interesting move for them as a studio, the game that they're actually making. And I think Unmatched is a really cool product to make into a digital adaptation. So
Yeah.
just as a kind of reiteration of what Unmatched is, you essentially have a core play piece that is a physical model, and that is on a board. And these boards have different spaces, and you can move your physical model around on this space. You'll also have what are essentially minions. So you might have, like, if you're playing as Medusa, you'll have a bunch of harpies, so you might have like 4 of those. But if you're playing as King Arthur, then you'll just have the one, and that's Merlin, right? And the idea is that you will take up these different spaces, move around in the different space, and you can do a few different actions. You can either move, whereby you will draw a card into your hand, and you use cards to attack things and defend against attacks, and also to do these kind of instant attacks, or instant sort of plays, I suppose. And then, so you draw that card, and then you also move around the space as well. So you move into a different position. Or you can play a card, so attack, for example. If you're next to an opponent, you can just attack, and then you'll do the thing on the card, and it will have a certain power score, and then there'll be an effect that the attack has, like during combat, draw X cards for, etc. Again, think kind of Magic the Gathering, but slightly lighter version of that. That's kind of essentially the game. And so it's kind of, the way I think of it is Magic the Gathering light with positional play. This digital adaptation is really cool. So the reason I think it's really cool is one of the sort of meta things with Unmatched is that the whole theming around it is very difficult to, non-copyrightable characters having fights with one another.
Yes.
So, for example, I mentioned Medusa, I mentioned King Arthur. The early access version also comes with Sinbad, and it also comes with Alice in Wonderland, or Alice Through the Looking Glass, whichever.
Yeah,
it's
so
the same thing.
that pretty much copies the Battle of the Legends,
which is
first box. Yeah.
Yes, the first box. So that is the sort of 2-player starter thing that you would play. I mean, well, technically 4 players. You can play 4 players with it. You can do 1v1, so one character, or 2v2. And so all of that is in the early access version. And the early access version is also, once it goes to 1.0 and comes out of it, it's going to be updated with, and I'm going to read from the press release so I don't get this wrong. It has Arthur, Sinbad, Medusa, Alice, and then it says Sarpedon and Memorial. Okay. The full release will then add Little Red, so Little Red Riding Hood, and Beowulf.
Classic tag team.
Now, all of these are clearly uncopyrightable or out of copyright characters, so you can play against. So it's sort of like an Avengers, a Who's Who Avengers-esque crossover.
The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen.
Yeah, exactly. And they will also be introducing in Season 1, which you can purchase separately, and this is partly why I think this is interesting. They'll add Bigfoot, Robin Hood, Jekyll and Hyde, Invisible Man, Dracula, and Sherlock Holmes. And they're going to also add in a bunch of other battlefields and stuff. And basically, spoilers, it's basically the physical editions, right? So there's a expansion which has got, Sherlock Holmes and
Cobble and Fug,
and stuff like that. Yeah, and one of the boards is called Soho. That'll be coming through in Season 1 as well, right? So you can see how they're doing this stuff.
Maybe they might do Winnie the Pooh now that he's in public.
Well, let's hope so.
Well, do you remember that is what I suggested? Winnie the Pooh and Miss Havisham.
Winnie the Pooh versus Miss Havisham is absolutely what the world is clamouring to see. But here's the thing: there are also a bunch of other expansions for Unmatched, and none of those are mentioned. And those expansions are Jurassic Park. There's a number of those, and one of them is Bruce Lee. All right, so those are not mentioned. So the reason I bring this up is, I think this is a really interesting model that Acram is going for at the moment, and the reason I say that is, so the base game itself is $20. It's about £15. That's quite steep for what that experience is. I mean, it's clearly cheaper than the physical edition, and it's the physical edition. It's beat for beat the physical edition. So maybe that's okay. And they will be adding these 2 additional characters in, as I say. So the reason I think this is interesting is because this is a digital tabletop game which they will continue to just kind of build on, kind of as a halfway house between what their previous work was, something like 8 Minute Empire, where yes, you could go and get new maps, for example, but really there wasn't that much additional stuff that you could do. Somewhere between that and like a live game like Hearthstone or Magic the Gathering or something along those lines, whereby there's just constantly new content. This kind of feels a little bit like a halfway house, because they mention it as Season 1, right? Which implies that they're sort of hoping there'll be a second season of, like you would do with something like a Rocket League or a Fortnite or one of those sorts of things. And I think that's really interesting from a digital tabletop perspective, because that's the dream, right? Like, you have this one brand, and then you just keep building and building and building and building on top of it. They seem to be setting it up in a really good way. So the game is, I played it on Steam. It runs beautifully. You've no problem. You can run it on almost anything. It's coming out on iOS. It's coming out on Android, and it's coming out on Switch. I assume they'll probably do the other consoles, but that's not been confirmed yet. All of them are cross-platform multiplayer.
Oh.
There is asynchronous multiplayer. I have no idea how that works on the consoles, because that seems like a nightmare to implement. But there is asynchronous multiplayer as well, which means that hopefully, like your things like Ticket to Ride and Splendor and stuff like that, hopefully there's going to always be an audience ready there, just waiting to do the multiplayer. And I think that that's really important, because the actual core experience is really good. Like, Unmatched is a great game, right? Unmatched is a really, really good game.
Absolutely.
But they've spent, I think wisely, all of their time and effort, it seems, on the multiplayer. Because the single player is basically just you against the AI, no campaign, no story, nothing to keep you there, nothing, the multiplayer, I think, is where it's going to be at, especially with that kind of, again, Fortnite-esque model whereby you're always adding new stuff. I think that's where it will live and breathe. And again, the cross-platform stuff, the async stuff, I think that's really going to help with this game. I'm really interested to see where this one goes.
It is interesting, because I think you're never going to have a situation where kind of the love of the physical board game kind of isn't there, so that you can't replace that. However, I do think the increase that we see in these digital versions of board games when they're done well are really great. And yes, they will never replace a game, but there is absolutely a market now and a place now for these digital adaptations.
Agreed.
Because it enables us four to play something like Ticket to Ride, and we're in 4 different parts of the country, and we can have a gaming experience. It may not be the true gaming experience for it because we're not sitting around a table interacting as we play it, but we have that experience. And it is interesting the way you describe it. I mean, the thing that springs to mind with me is it's like a board game of like Marvel versus Capcom.
Yeah.
But with literary,
Yeah.
but with those kind of
exactly
those
that,
different kind of things. And I think that idea of the seasons, as you mentioned, like the likes of Fortnite and stuff like that, and that kind of like your EA Pass type thing of like signing up and you kind of regularly you're paying for a subscription to it kind of thing. For a board game, I think a lot of them that wouldn't work, but something like this where you do have that kind of very clearly defined, we can put this pack in and you can get X characters, and that makes it very simple. You couldn't do that. It's not like, I mean, other ones you'd be like, okay, here's a new map and you can have a subscription to that. This is very, very clear that you can get new characters and new maps, and it's very easy to expand on that. So it is really interesting to see board games, at least some of them, moving into that kind of arena. I use the arena being the figurative word, that is basically what they're doing, especially when you factor in kind of multiplayer and stuff. Would it just be 2-player multiplayer, or would it be able to go up to kind of more than that?
It should be able to go up to 4, so you can do 2v2 battles, and I think the game will really shine in that area. There's a lot of there's a lot of differences between each of the characters, so it is highly asymmetrical. My hope is that they keep all of if you don't own all of the characters, that you are able to play against people who do have those characters. And I know that's more than possible. It happens in a bunch of other
Star
games.
Realms does that really well.
Star Realms is good for that, yeah. So yeah, I think
you'd also have to kind of protect against the pay to win scenario of kind of like, if you're not getting all the extra packs, can you actually, if you're playing as King Arthur, like how can you compete against a T-Rex from the Jurassic Park?
No, yeah.
In terms of, is that going to be too powerful for you?
No, there's no.
Yeah, it's a bit more like, Super Smash Brothers, more like multiverses, where in real life Arya Stark could butcher Bugs Bunny, but in multiverses they're balanced to play each other within that world.
Good point, Sam.
So there's some downsides. One, the audio is really bad. And it's not actually bad quality. It's just there's not very much of it, and so it repeats quite often. This is one of those things where if you've played Unmatched and you've liked it, this is a no-brainer. Put the money in. It's worth it. Full price, 100%. Like without a doubt. Like they'll add that new content in. I think 6 characters for £15. Brilliant. They're coming. I trust them. If you look at their previous games, they support them long term. They build on them.
Yeah, absolutely.
They make games. I think Charterstone might have launched mixed, for example. That it's now in positive. Like they do good by their community. I'm very impressed with how they do that stuff. So if you're an Unmatched fan, this is it. Like, yeah, this is it. Go get it. It's really good. If you haven't played Unmatched, or you're like, Unmatched is fine, like it's not my favourite, this is one that I would say pop on the old wish list. This to me is an absolute no-brainer when it drops to a tenner. Like, if it's a tenner and you've got 6 characters in, you should buy this. Like, this is just a brilliant game.
If there was going to be a bingo card for the Staying In podcast,
Yeah.
what would be on it?
Pete talks at length about an obscure game. Sam talks at length about an obscure board game.
He's saying basically. Pete
Sam
going.
saying wonderful.
Chris says genuinely.
Yeah, genuinely, basically anything that's got Lee on the end.
My wife has kindly informed me that I say the phrase "kind of" a lot.
Yeah.
Which I can now no longer listen to myself without hearing it every single time. So to all the listeners, I'm kind of sorry. Kind of.
I think
Listeners probably won't be aware of this, but the Peter Willington I actually recognise the waveform pattern. I can actually delete it without listening to it as I'm editing.
that's pretty powerful. I think my silent laugh would be be on there on our bingo card.
Making a reference to an extremely British institution.
Chris remembering an old episode number.
Yep.
Yes.
Remembering.
Yes,
Yeah.
definitely. Sam gets too carried away after watching one episode or playing a game for just 1 hour. And then
Game of the year.
and then retracts it the next episode.
Yeah.
I think we could make, maybe in time for Christmas, we should make a little staying in bingo card for people to play.
Well,
over
Sam,
Christmas.
I agree with you. We should do that, but we actually have something for our listeners already.
What's this?
An early Christmas present.
Early Christmas present.
Depending on when you're listening to this.
Depending on when you're listening.
If you're at Christmas,
Merry
it's your Christmas present.
Yeah, yeah. This is what we got you. So, if you look in the show notes for this podcast, or go on our Twitter or Instagram, because we'll shout about it as well, we have made you a game, and it is called "What's Better Than a Hot Tub?"
No.
So,
Long-time listeners may be familiar with this game.
yeah, because of course
Yes,
we
'cause
talked about
Chris-
it in a previous episode, didn't we, Chris?
Yeah, we did. We talked about it in that
Pete,
episode.
me and you didn't show up for that one.
We talked about it in that episode, which was called. It's coming back to me now. It was episode 157, wasn't it?
157, yeah. Good memory. We talked about that. We basically made a game in a hot tub that you can only play in a hot tub.
In a hot tub, yeah. It's the worst commercial idea.
Yeah, so we've made a game that involves a piece of paper and a hot tub, and you can go and get it now. It is pay what you want, and if you want to pay nothing, that's fine. You can go and get it. We'll link to it in the show notes, and we'll talk about it on the socials and all that sort of stuff. We put it on DriveThruRPG. I think technically it's also, weirdly, I think it's also on the Dungeon Guild for D&D. I don't know how it ended up there, but so basically you can get it from there. It's free, and basically it's a word game that you play with your friends in a hot tub, and I'll leave it at that. So go and get it. It's free, and we'd really love to hear what you think about it. Because
Doesn't have to be free,
doesn't have to be free,
but it can be.
but it can be. So
It's your choice.
Nice save. And if listeners want to try and take pictures, actually maybe not. Don't take pictures of yourself playing hot tub.
do take pictures.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Send them to us.
But if you do accidentally drop your phone in a hot tub,
stayingpod@gmail.com.
it's not our fault. We should probably put that as a little thing at the bottom of the rules.
Yeah, exactly. Print it out. You'll have fun with it. So just as we go into a cost of living crisis, that's what's better than a hot tub. You can
only be played in a hot tub.
that can only be played in a hot tub. But you know, it's
I just think we're cutting off our noses by our face here by making people get in a hot tub to play it. I think it's a game for all the seasons.
To be fair, and this may say something about where I live, my local garden centre does have a jacuzzi outlet, and you can try before you buy. So I'm just saying.
Perfect.
What, is there just somebody there, like dressed in a suit with a clipboard, like, you know, when you go to a car dealer?
Just from the waist up.
Handing out copies of the game?
Yeah, exactly. If you want to try that out, go give it a go. We'll link to it here, as I say. Really
Yeah, and if you've got any suggestions for the staying in Christmas bingo card, which is now a thing,
that we have to do.
Yeah.
Thanks,
and
Sam.
this is exactly how we got into a situation where we made a game in a hot tub.
Yeah.
we just
can't talk to
committed
each
to a
other.
thing.
We just have to try and create a game to delay.
all the time.
And also, if
any-
Ben, you want to ask us a question as well, please do.
Yeah, stayinginpod@gmail.com is the email address. Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. We're all on those. We're on all of those things. You can find us. You can search for us. You know how to use a search engine, for goodness sake.
We want your questions, your bingo,
your Pete
ideas, and
investigates.
your pictures of you in a hot tub.
And a piece of you in a hot tub.
Oh my
That
god!
can't be our
okay.
thing now. That's the.
can.
In the last episode, we talked about sign-offs.
Yep.
The sign-off
Yeah.
can't be
Send us
saying
a
it.
picture.
Send us a picture of you in a hot tub.
We'll accept drawings.
No. And just a final thank you to everyone that we met at Tabletop Gaming live. It was an absolute pleasure to be there, and thank you to Osprey for giving us the game to smuggle inside and play and excite a few people there who were also excited by playing games about
And thanks
trains.
for not confiscating Chris's aubergines.
Yes.
They were doing a very
thanks.
lacklustre
Thanks,
Parmigiano.
Tabletop Gaming Live. Great. I think that's it, isn't it?
Yep.
I think that's it.
All right then.
All right.
All right.